Marisa, if I can start with you, if we can just unmute you. Marisa, I'd like to know for you, how has the global landscape changed since the global lockdown was put in place a few weeks ago?
So firstly, hi Mark, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your panel. And through Alex, I was invited, as Alex and I have worked together and done a few projects. And welcome to everyone who's dialed in. It's great to be here. So just a little bit of context. I moved from Cape Town to Tel Aviv 6 years ago, and I've been working purely in the high-tech sector. So everything I'm going to share with you is really from that perspective, from more of the USA, the British, EMEA, we call it, and the APAC, which is the Asia regions. And just to give you a little bit, a brief sort of catch-up, Israel has been out of lockdown pretty much for the last 3 weeks. And one of the things that we've seen here is that every week brings a new mindset, a new set of challenges. So one of the things that's been incredibly interesting is to watch how people have been forced to make quick decisions and be super adaptable. So a lot of the companies that I'm working with are sometimes 36,000 people. To get a decision to go ahead with something can take 3-4 months. What we've seen and what our clients have seen is that actually we can be much more efficient in the way that we make decisions. We don't have to have so much bureaucracy. So one of the things that is really emerging is speed and adaptability and growth mindset, really being able to keep up and reflect on your mindset and keep the pulse of what's happening. So that's actually weirdly forced people in the high tech who are not emotionally often very fluid to be incredibly empathetic. We've even got CEOs writing letters about burnout and spending time with family and taking 1 day off a month or 2 days off a month for yourself and rest. Where normally we see that high-tech CEOs are not known for their empathy. So a lot of these things have been fast-tracked, and also digital transformation. Everyone's been talking about the cloud and digital transformation. Actually, what COVID has done is just really supersonic that, and everyone now has to be adept at running their business in the cloud and virtually. So people who've been tech resistant, I'm not, even though I work in tech, I'm not the most tech person, but you have to learn how to operate your Zooms, your breakout rooms. You have to find out what people find connective and engaging and exhausting. So I think the last thing as well that we really have seen is that companies are putting a whole lot more stress on mental health, looking after their employee engagement, energy, and being known in the marketplace to be companies that responded in a caring way. So I think what we've really seen is a super shift towards that, whereas we were in the baby steps of that. Now it's sort of hyper growth in those areas. And the work from home scenario where some companies were resistant, I think that's going to see a huge change and a big impact on commercial property rentals. I think we're going to see a lot of companies cut their physical presence. So actually less offices in a way, but still a need, still a need.
Great. Thank you very much, Marisa. Alex, if I can ask you to unmute yourself and just perhaps answer the same question from your point of view.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everybody. And it's lovely to be here to chat to everybody. And yes, I have had also the same as Marisa had the experience to see the embracing of the tech side. And obviously in my business coaching, a big focus of our business is around helping people embrace the digital landscape and people being forced to do that. So that's been the one thing. The interesting thing that has come also of that is seeing how many companies, particularly those that maybe were resistant of remote work and embracing more digital tools, maybe found themselves a little ill-prepared for the sudden need to be able to work remotely. We're seeing things like companies trying to recreate their company corporate culture in a remote world, and it doesn't quite work exactly the same. Using tools like we've seen a sudden increase of using Zoom and trying to use Zoom to redo all your meetings, etc., when companies who typically have always been remote companies actually use a lot of other tools to help for efficiency, productivity, etc. And then the other thing, and obviously this is an industry that's quite close to my heart. I've been for many years in the hospitality and the tourism industry. South Africa is obviously very reliant on tourism, and we are still very much in lockdown. And we've seen also the economic impact of lockdown, and we're seeing how some industries are completely been destroyed through it, and obviously that has repercussions for people, their livelihood. A lot of people are left with very little choices for them, or are being forced to have to be creative at how they go about making an income for themselves, particularly for people who are in smaller businesses or are in the face-to-face service industry, which is a lot harder to adapt into the remote or digital space. So I think those are the two key things that I've certainly seen the most of in my work.
Great, thank you, Alex. Okay, Cindy, if you can unmute yourself and perhaps share your perspective on that question.
A little bit like Alex, a lot of my clients are based in the hotel industry and tourism. And that's been really interesting because there's so much uncertainty as to what is going to happen and when it's going to happen. And whereas, people were able to model around, 1-year strategies, 3-year strategies. They don't have that anymore. And it's quite interesting to see how certain people are fumbling around that sector and around sort of not being in the moment and possibly creating innovation with what they have. So that's been interesting to work with. But the sector that I have been working with a lot is the spiritual sector, obviously with my background, and that has just been extraordinary. People who are using their intuition at the moment and connecting and letting that flow of their innate intelligence come through seem to be tapping into really good energies and are able to be in the moment, pivot and be like that. And I think that is going to become more of a word rather than using intuition. I think innate intelligence is a soft word for corporate that one could use. But we're seeing people embracing that a lot more, and certainly with therapists and the personal development sector, there's been an audience that has wanted to develop, and so the personal development sector has grown. So it's interesting. So the two different sectors have two very different vibrations, and it's how we as coaches can support that. And that for me is sometimes I'm not quite sure what that might be.
Right, thank you, Cindy. So the next question then naturally springs from this. What are the ramifications of these changes? And perhaps Marisa, maybe you can lead us in with that question. What are the ramifications of all these changes?
Look, I think that I'm going to talk from the perspective of, as a coach and having your own business and supplying this market. So the short-term ramifications have been, but I'm starting to see a thaw, is that all budgets are frozen. So if you're looking for new business in terms of big processes and projects, and one of the differences that I had to really adapt to when I left South Africa is that a lot of my work with teams was process work. I would be able to do a program over 9 months, and when I went into the global tech sector, they have ADHD. Practically everyone's got ADHD. So if you talk to them about 5 group sessions, they all freeze. So I had to adapt work to be much shorter and sharper. And I think with this current environment, that's actually escalated. People don't have the bandwidth for long processes or big processes, especially in groups. So I think one of the ramifications is altering your content in bite sizes, digestible sizes, rather than much deeper processes. I think if you're doing one-on-one work, then that deeper process you can always go into, and there's always room and space for that. But I think if you are a facilitator pitching for new business at this stage, to understand that there is a freeze. However, the good news is that because people are not having big conferences and using budget for flying and hotels and hiring out these big conference centers and paying, tens of thousands of pounds to entertainers for, an hour, they've got that budget there to access. And if you position it in the correct way, which is, I believe that a lot of companies are very concerned about their employees' mental health and well-being. My area is to coach leadership and mindset and growth mindset. So that in a way, I've still got new business during this time, but it's everything big and long-term has really been frozen. And I think you have to be very, very adaptable and look at how your product can speak directly into the burning points. And those burning points are changing literally every week. There's something else that was relevant, but 2-3 weeks later, not so relevant. So you've got to be very adaptable yourself about how you're positioning and what you are speaking about, that your clients are going to open up their budget to you.
Great. Thank you, Marisa. Alex, if I can ask you to take that question and let us know your thoughts about that.
I'd like to answer this more on an individual level, and what I'm certainly seeing, not only from a coaching perspective, but seeing just in general as dealing with anybody and everybody that I deal with in my life. I think that we are certainly at the moment in a stage where there is a heightened level of fear. And a lot of it is due to uncertainty. There's so much mixed messaging. People don't know what to believe, what not to believe. We, as humans, don't do well when we're not in control of things. And there's been a huge need for people to surrender and embrace what they really don't want to. In an earlier discussion that we had, one of the things that came up was that initially when we had our lockdown in South Africa, it was supposed to only be for 2 weeks, and we saw a very high level of people buying in and supporting it and being okay with it because it was finite and in control. It was something that was completely easy to plan and control around, etc. It then got extended, and you started seeing there was a shift in how people were accepting it because of the sense of uncertainty. And as people just don't do well with uncertainty. And so we're seeing a lot of fear, panic, anxiety. What comes out of it is that people often can go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, and we are having to deal with people in a acute version of those situations, and dealing and facilitating processes for them to deal with that kind of trauma, and particularly for those who've been hit hard economically, like if you've suddenly lost your job, or you've had your salary cut by 60%, or that kind of thing, which we're seeing so much of, and people are feeling a little helpless and they don't know when the end is in sight. Yes, there's a lot of work around trying to help people manage that fear, and in order to get out of that fear so that they can be more focused on the greater community. And I think one of the things that has come out for me quite clearly in this is that from a societal point of view, we need to be a lot more community focused, or and essentially this virus, the way you beat it is by being other focused. You don't beat it by being focused only on yourself. You know, everything about lockdown, social distancing, wearing masks, everything is about being other focused. And if there's anything that's come out of it, is that we've probably been too self-focused and self-centered. And for me, the messaging is that as a society, we need to be focusing a lot more on what is good for the greater society and adapting our way that we engage and interact with the greater society.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Some insightful thoughts there. Cindy, can I ask you to share your thoughts about that question?
I know we have a number of people that I see from around the globe, and and that's very heartwarming for me. I think in South Africa, in terms of we still have models and business models here that are quite old-fashioned in terms of they have old-fashioned hierarchies, they manage through fear, blame, that kind of culture. And I think we're starting to see, and also with the racial tension that we feel here, that hierarchy, this is not a disease for those people or these people, it's been across the board. And we have seen a unitedness in South Africa that's gone beyond the color that we're so used to talking about. Certainly in the first few weeks, now that it's come back to it, you know, us not all focusing, you know, when it was lockdown and we couldn't do anything, we were all facing in the same direction and all on the same page, and we were all in it together. And at that time was, I think for the first time ever, was a real feeling of oneness of our country, and how, for me, we can tap into that and start breaking those borders, start creating the divide, that humanitarian side of sharing the gap. And I think it's an opportunity for us at this time, as facilitators of conversations with leaders. How are we, what are the questions we're asking? What are we prodding in order to bring that change? And is it our role? And those are the questions I'm asking. And I'd love to debate that for ages with a whole lot of coaches, but those are the questions I'm asking myself, because I would like to see a world that has more of a oneness rather than a us and them, and the egocentricness that we've seen in the capitalism that we've seen over the last sort of 5 years. So for me, is this the chance to change? Is this the chance to bring in light? Is this the chance to lessen the gap?
Thank you, Cindy. I suppose that leads naturally on to another question. What are the changes that we need to make, perhaps individually or in our work or with our businesses? What are the changes that we need to make to kind of fit in, to survive in this new landscape? Marisa, if you could lead us off with that.
So for me, I think there are two aspects: the one-on-one coaching, and of course then group facilitation. I think just in the big picture, if we're looking at mindset in business, and again, just to sort of reiterate my context, I'm working in the high tech, which is very quick moving as it is without this COVID and all this volatility. It's a very tough arena, very smart people. And I think in the mindset, I think that one of the things that I have to play with as someone who's coaching leaders and who is leading transformation in teams around their mindset is that the empathy and having deeper conversations, because people are really, really for the first time, they have been exposed to leaders' fears about their parents contracting COVID, or their partner having weak lungs, or people's mortgages that they might not have to pay because can't pay because they're being put on half salaries. So I think what is interesting here is to take the bit and to push into a more spiritual dialogue in this very high-tech world, which is very normally averse to anything too in-depth or emotional. Even though over the last 3-4 years, there's been a lot of talk about leading through empathy, and this is still the top companies like Google who have got these kinds of mandates going through. But I think that as the role as a facilitator and a coach, we can really now push that conversation of diversity, resilience, work-home integration, not balance, and making policies in the workplace that really support the family. So for one example, I see, some of my clients are talking about taking the money for Vegas and using it for people to reward them and their family. So this is the first time we hear business talking about the family unit, not just the individual, and rewarding it. I think in terms of our business one-on-one coaching, I've got to say 70% of my coaching is done remotely anyway. I'm coaching America and Asia and so forth. And about 60% of my clients actually never ever meet face to face unless we fly in somewhere to do a workshop. So I think on the one-to-one coaching area, there's not much of a change here. I think we can really drive supporting leaders to support the transition and the volatility and the uncertainty, and making space for more personal conversations. That's an area that we, as business coaches, we can definitely start to expand a lot more on, rather than just strategic and tactical coaching. And then in terms of workshops, we've got to start to offer packages that are obviously more tailored for the virtual world. I have been working with virtual workshops for the past 2 years. So I've got a feel for, I've been able to do 4-hour workshops, 5-hour sessions. And I think it's like a new skill. It's a new endurance. We're going to have to build it up. And I think we're really going to have to let go of a lot of our preciousness about how a process works and how we see the benefit of doing it step by step by step. I think we're going to have to be much more adaptable and responsible to what people really need and what they can absorb at the moment, because people are in fluctuation. They're going up and down one day to the next, 1 week to the next. And we've really got to listen as opposed to falling in love with our processes and our methodologies. So that's something that I think is really going to help people to adapt their product to the market.
Thank you, Marisa. Some insightful points there. If I can ask Alex to take that further, what changes do you see necessary?
One of the first things that we found that we needed to do, especially when just before lockdown hit, when we started already seeing borders closing and people started being laid off and that kind of thing. One of the first things we thought was, what can we do to support the process? And at the time, the initial thought was, well, we're online. Our businesses work wholly online. It's completely remote. And a significant part of our product is e-learning based products and courses and so on. So it seemed like a very simple decision at the time to just simply say, well, let's just open all our courses for free and let just people have them. It doesn't cost us anything to do that. But what's come out of that was the realization that actually we're probably going to start seeing that the whole pricing model, pricing structure, how we actually contract with clients is changing. Certainly we found that. So we certainly had a lot more people suddenly needing assistance with moving into the remote space, people who maybe a year ago were not as in such a hurry and now suddenly are, but also their business or themselves were hit hard financially, and sudden but didn't maybe have the financial resources to invest, etc. So we've started doing things like playing with open pricing models or donation-based models in certain scenarios, with interestingly finding that sometimes donation-made models land up actually generating more revenue than a standard pricing model, because those who can afford land up donating more, and which lands up sponsoring those who can't, it's really interesting to see how when you leave that over to the community to decide what the pricing should be, how actually the business lands up being rewarded more because you're giving them your trust in that. And then the other thing was playing with models around revenue share. So sort of doing work up front with a revenue share down the line, which make us more in partnership with our clients than necessarily having a client service provider type relationship. So seeing also more of that. So we're working, it's more sort of like, yeah, as I say, in partnership, we're working hand in hand with people. We're in this together, as opposed to, you have a problem, I'm going to try and help you solve it, but actually it's still your problem. So we're finding that that's come up a lot more, just working side by side. And then also I concur with Marisa around that. I think the space opens up a lot more, that we can, that there's a lot more openness towards a more spiritual take on things. People are a lot more open to different ways of approaching and dealing with challenges, whether it be in the workplace or in our own careers or as individuals, and looking for solutions other than necessarily the traditional headspace-centered solutions, and also more heart and spirit-based centered solutions. And I think that the coaches who might do really well with this are those who can introduce the spiritual element. And I'm going to, I'm not exactly sure how to word this, but without the woo-woo, if I can say, without the you know, if it can be still kept, the language to be kept quite business-like, corporate, because that makes it more accessible, but in essence, it's the same practices, it's the same understanding and intelligence that's been brought in. I think those are businesses little coaches that'll do well, because they can tap into that, but they're presenting it in what's more palatable for people that haven't traditionally been open to the spiritual space. And I think with this also, we're going to see that businesses are understanding more and more that they are central to community. So community isn't necessarily only there to serve them as either customers or laborers, but that it's an ecosystem that they have to work together, and that business is part of community and gives back as much as what they are taking, that it has to be a symbiotic relationship for good business to work. And we've seen that already shifting in the past years, but I think that that's going to become really critical for business, is that is really clear, that it has to be a win-win-win for all parties for business to thrive.
Great, thank you, Alex. Okay, Cindy, let's pass that ball to you. How do you see changes taking place?
So I think for me, I'm going to just talk about the experience that we've had with the business that we have. And to be fair, I didn't do a whole lot of coaching in the first 6 weeks of lockdown, because we were so busy taking our business from being a physical business to an online business, and how quickly could we convert that. The great thing is that our message, rather than having 8 people physically in Cape Town, we've gone from 8 to 16, and we will push that further and further. So I just like to use that as rather from a business point of view, rather than a coach point of view. I think if you can find the flow and you know, feel the fear and do it anyway. I remember saying to Mark, you know, let's just do this. And he said, but, you know, we could get 100 people, and we got 100 people. And, you know, we would struggle to get 40 people in the physical into our business. So our world came from our little beautiful fishing village that I call in Cape Town, the most beautiful place to live in the world. Overnight, we opened to the world. And that was just, for me, a beautiful experience. And I think I just want to share that. That was really important and amazing for me as a business partner.
Great. Thank you, Cindy.
I actually just wanted to carry on off of what Cindy said, is that I think that one of the things that has really popped people's brains open here is that we are literally now the global village that we've all been talking about. So before, when I left South Africa to come to Israel and I positioned my clients to do remote coaching, I would say like 80% of them were resistant to it. And I think now it's going to be standard. I think that we can reach all sorts of markets that we couldn't before. And one of the things that I've definitely seen as a business change is that there is more collaboration than competition. So there are companies that are going to try to drive the competition down and bargain their service providers into the ground. But overall, their brand will not hold up very well, because one of the key things that is now attracting talent to work for companies and clients to do business with companies is, how did you show up in the time of COVID? And one of the things that I think that people are much more open to now is collaboration. So if you are reaching out to someone in America or in, you know, Brazil or whatever it is, then you have a reason, because we've all gone through a united experience. And that way it's a lot of fun now that we can actually see ways to play with all these different countries and all these different people, because we've all gone through this collective, you know, there's nothing like a trauma to bind people. Okay, so everyone remembers where they were on 9/11, or when Princess Diana was announced, that tunnel. I mean, everyone remembers where they were. And so this is a great way to open a conversation and to get in there in a really connected space. So I think that I just wanted to bounce off of Cindy's point, and also to talk to Alex's point about companies being responsible for community. I also think companies now can have the opportunity to create themselves in a global community of their industry, not just in a local, national spectrum.
Thank you, Marisa. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open up the conversation. Ron Holmes, I know you're an executive coach. Ron, can you just introduce yourself briefly and share your comments? I think you've got to unmute yourself, Ron.
Yeah, hello everybody. Great conversation, appreciate it. Nice to see you, Mark, and a bunch of people I know. Now, what I was going to say, I did a little webinar for a client I'd never met. It was a fintech company, about 28 people. And I happened to have mentioned that I could do a meditation, and I'd sort of gone out of my head, and we finished 10 minutes early. And they all said, what about the meditation? So I found myself facilitating an online sort of body scan meditation, which I really hadn't planned, but I was echoing, I can't remember who said it, but this spiritual thing is kind of in the air. It's interesting, that was a collaborative. There's something I'm certainly getting, that we don't have to be an island anymore. And I think a call like this, you know, why try and work it all out yourself when you can join minds as we're doing? It's like, I wouldn't want to go back. And I just find my behaviors changing. I'm going, who can I reach out with? I connected with somebody this morning based on a call the other, etc. I'll just leave it there. So echoing some of the thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ron. Yeah, there's definitely a, you know, when people are struggling to understand some big things in life, sometimes we do look upwards or inwards rather than just at what's been happening in the past, or, you know, we change our perspective because it needs to change. Alex, I saw you had your hand up. You've got a comment to share?
Yes, thank you, Mark. I actually wanted to piggyback off Marisa after she piggybacked off Cindy. So I think part of what we're going to see, especially as Marisa was saying about how people are going to work more together as opposed to necessarily competing, is that we are seeing, I think people are starting to realize that we actually live in a world where there is abundance. And we do not necessarily have to operate in this mindset of scarcity. And this is where the strong competitiveness has always come from, is that the belief that the pie is so small and we have to fight for a bit of the pie. But actually, there is a huge pie. It's just been given to a very small entity of people. But there is a big pie, and there is actually enough to go around. And if we can work together, it'll share better and the pie will probably be bigger. And so there is abundance. And I think that that's going to be a key part, is that shifting into this understanding that there is so much to go around, and none of us need to have everything, but we can all have enough if we're happy to have our little bit and work together with everybody else. And then there's plenty.
Thank you very much, Alex. I loved the story. I'm not sure, Marisa, if you saw it, but there's a lovely story in South Africa. One of the big supermarkets, it's a Spar, so I think they're mostly franchise-based. And the one Spar opened up some shelf space to the shops nearby that were unable to open in lockdown. And this is a real me versus we moment, because you know, the owner of this particular store realized that he actually needed or wanted for the higher good that the other businesses in his neighborhood survived. And this was a real profound outcome from this lockdown that I saw. Yeah, thank you, Claire. The Spar in Plet.
Yeah.
Right,
and there was also, I think, another Spar that closed their stationery section. And they said, please go and buy from, in the same complex, there was a small stationery shop. So I think it's infectious. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's one of the real profound outcomes of this. You know, we kind of need everybody to survive. We can't have massive portions of the population dropping off. You know, people are still paying their staff who can't work if they're able to. Yeah, a wonderful outcome.
Hey, Mark. Hi, panelists. Thank you very much for the engaging chat and for having this. It's been really eye-opening and refreshing. I've been in the culture consulting space for the last 3 years, and I found I've hit my head a lot against the paradigm that a lot of the medium-sized and small companies aren't ready for like a full frontal employee engagement culture analysis, really focusing on their people above their profit line. They're more focused on sustainability of their profits before their people. Still, you know, it's kind of like the old world paradigm of the zero-sum game that's playing out still. Whereas I'm seeing a lot of younger fintech companies, especially ones that are influenced by the international market, a lot more open to employee-first approaches or employee-centric approaches. My question, I'm not sure, there was a panelist who mentioned talking about the specific, it wasn't pain points, but like the burning issues that were constantly changing at quite a rapid rate. What are your clients actually talking about as burning issues at this point that we could potentially tap into and, communicate from that place when we market ourselves, when we put ourselves forward?
So Paul, that was my point. And I think that I'm going to just take it back to your first thing where you say, you know, you've got these smaller companies playing some zero game and they're not, they're not putting their employees first. So there are two things here. The younger companies started by younger people are much more absorbent to the holistic approach. They're much more fluid, adaptable. They're listening to thought leaders that are more international. Anyone above the 34 age range as a leader. Not always. I've got some incredibly expansive 54-year-old leaders, but anyone generally above 34 is a little more cautious and old school kind of thing. But the reality is, Paul, and I think that's why I mentioned we've got to let go of being very precious. And the reality is that if the company is not making a profit, it cannot invest in culture shift. You know, if I've got to choose between paying a salary and paying for a program, I'm going to choose paying my salaries. And I think that as providers, we need to understand the business of their businesses more. We need to understand the economics so that when we are speaking to it, we can feed directly into what is the return of an investment if they have a culture of collaboration. That means that when you put people on half pay, they are working for greater good and they're not being resentful and working half capacity for you. So it's also about the way you shift your language to fit into what the mindset is of your company. And everything that has been discussed here and talked about here is completely sellable and practical and needed. It's just the language that we talk in. Because if you talk in what Alex said is the woo-woo language to business, even through this whole thing, they're going to back off. They're going to send their people on Microsoft training rather than the culture paradigm. So language is incredibly important, understanding the business of their business, their industry. For example, if it's a paper printing industry, has it all shut down? And then the burning points that I'm hearing are things like people not actually being, people have been overproductive in lockdown because they've had nothing to do. So we found actually that people in a way cannot separate their energy and don't know when to shut down their computers. And as a result are actually getting fatigued. So if you are in the wellness industry, this is perfect to tap into how do you keep your people focused, healthy, and open. If you're talking about culture shift, you probably want to go for things like pivoting, adaptability, being ahead of the curve, and having good relations and intuition around what's happening with your customers. So one of the things that I've been doing with my customers is to just have, hey, how are you doing? Let's have a glass of wine chats. And I always say to them, let's do 20 minutes. And if they want to book more, they can book more. One of the things that I would say of getting people's time now is to make it bite size, because people's bandwidth is so pulled on that if you say, oh, can we book a meeting? It's like, oh my God, 30 minutes, 45, an hour. But if you say, hey, let's have a 20-minute chat, that's much lighter for someone. So those are just some of the things that I would say in answer to your dilemma.
Great, thank you, Marisa. We've got time for one more question, and Brenton has patiently had his hand up for some time. Brenton, can you unmute yourself and share your question?
Yeah, sure, with pleasure. Thanks, Mark, and thanks everyone. What a fascinating conversation. So just the thing that's really jumping up for me as a coach and as a facilitator and dealing with certainly my clients around the world at the moment and noticing what's happening in the world is relationships are at the core of everything, whether it's business, whether it's in the business, whether it's client relationships, supplier relationships. And the thing that holds that together is connection and communication. And so because we're all working remotely, what I'm noticing a lot of is that we're all able to set ourselves up with a Zoom account and to click on a link and join a meeting. But the majority of people aren't investing time in learning how to use the technology properly. And so at a time where we really need to be building and maintaining and working on connections very strongly, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice by using the technology badly. And so what I'm noticing is that there's a lot of value in upskilling ourselves as coaches and facilitators so that we really are familiar with the tech and the different platforms that are in use, Zoom, WebEx, Teams, you name it. And then being able to just guide the people that we're working on and with to be able to be more familiar and competent themselves, so that by extension, they're able to then guide and work with the people they're working with in their business and outside their business. Because if we don't get that right, people are stressed enough as it is at the moment, and there's nothing worse than a bad online meeting to make that even worse. So just, it's an invitation really to everyone to just invest time in learning the tech, and it's quite easy to do. So thank you. Thanks for accommodating that.